But what I was able to figure out by course of 5 years that I found that patients who had blood types of O positive, or O positive or O negative, they don't like nothing in their ears. So if you have a patient who are like, it works, but I don't like it, ask them what their blood type is. I bet you it's going to be O. If they get this reaction where they feel euphoric or high, they're probably A or AB.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. When I was a kid, I loved the books of Robert Heinlein. I might have read all of them at least once. He was a counterbalance to the groovy counterculture that I grew up in. His heroes were gritty, tough in a way that made sense, even if they didn't fit, maybe especially because they didn't fit the world that I was growing up in. I was looking for a different Heinlein quote when I found this one. All men are born unequal. Classic Heinlein. Classic because, first of all, it's obviously true, and secondly, because it's provocative in a way that runs me straight into the sharp edge of my beliefs. I suspect saying this when he wrote it would get you in trouble, and today, you know how well that would go over. That said, I think he's right. We are, all of us, born unequal. Uniquely and so clearly not the same. A mosaic of strengths and deficiencies, profoundly diverse talents and capacities. Yet, somehow, we're supposed to pretend that this isn't the case. I think that what he's pointing at is how our differences mean that our lives will unfold in very different ways. That inequality is built into the human enterprise. Diversity, when you think about it, it's unavoidable. The question is, what do we do about it? This is an area where East Asian medicine, it shines. It recognizes that everyone is different, that we are endowed with different capacities that unavoidably will affect how our life plays out within the influence of the 5 phases and the 6 qi. I'm not a scholar, and so when I read books like the Tao Te Ching, the Zhuangzi, or the I Ching for that matter, it's likely that I read these books in such a way that they mirror my beliefs back to me. That said, nowhere in these classics do I find the idea that we are all entitled to the same heavenly measure. What comes through for me is that our experience unfolds within the tides of complex relationships. Often enough, the greatest obstacles comes from ourselves. It's the differences, how they shape our perception and relationships, the ways in which they affect our health, and how they generate our weaknesses and capacities that then in turn gives rise to the opportunities and troubles of our time here between heaven and earth. The differences, they're real. The idea that all people are created equal, it's patently absurd. It sounds good for political purposes and seems to be combustible tinder if you're looking to incite a revolution. But if you look at the handiwork of heaven as expressed on earth, you'll see more difference than similarity. The question I've had for myself is how can I become more appreciative of the differences between myself and others with vastly different talents? How can I allow their strengths to supplement my weaknesses without feeling jealousy or envy? And how can I stop blaming others for not seeing things the way that I do? Again, one of the beauties of East Asian medicine is how it recognizes and works with individual differences. So it's no wonder that the methods that we use with acupuncture can be so varied and diverse. It can be maddening to the mindset that wants to make everything the same. And perhaps for building bridges or apartment complexes, there is math and physics that is the same for creating stable and durable structures. But complex living systems, we tend to thrive more in diversity and symbiotic differences, which is not to say that we can ignore certain principles, but those principles can be expressed in wildly different ways. In this conversation with John Howard, we explore the microsystem of the ear and, in particular, the Battlefield Acupuncture Protocol. While it does rely on a few essential points, there's a lot going on with the various layers that can be accessed through the ear. It's a lively conversation, and we're going to get into it in just a moment. Stay with us. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out the new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lyle, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Sten. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AccuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AccuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
John Howard, welcome to Qiological.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Delighted to have you. So we are here today to talk a little bit about something that is really interesting to me. Oh gosh, that's not fair to say. Anything about acupuncture is interesting to me. But you work in a particular realm. You work a lot with the military. And there's a thing or two that you know about Battlefield Acupuncture, which is where I'd like to start today.
Sure. Well, again, thank you for having me. And yeah, I've been working with the military and battlefield acupuncture since 2005. I was lucky enough to get a fellowship with the inventor of the protocol. His name was Dr. Richard Niemzau. And I met him in 2005. And for 5 years, I would go to Andrews Air Force Base and some other places and observe him, help him, and just basically absorb from him for 5 years. And to this day, I still actually work with him and still do some work for him and with him, I guess you could say.
Now, what happened in 2005? How did that come about? I mean, not everybody just somehow gets an internship with the Army or Navy or whoever you're with. What happened? How did that land for you?
Well, my background is I was in the military. I was in the U.S. Navy as a medic, and so I got cross trained to go with the Marines. So I have a fairly broad understanding of different agencies. And 2005, when I applied for a position at the Maryland Acupuncture Society newsletter to do their secretary newsletter, and they brought me in to write a newsletter. And one of the first jobs we had was to go meet this Air Force colonel down at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland and to work with him or talk with him about what he's doing with acupuncture in the military. And that was like a shock because in the military, I always heard these rumblings that they had acupuncture. But when the colonel told us to meet us in front of the base at 5 a.m., I was like, where's he taking us? Because nothing happens at 5 a.m., especially at the military hospital, not a darn thing. And it was a Wednesday, and that's important because Wednesdays were like his new patient days. So when we walked into the hospital, probably about 5:10, 5:15, we were walking down a long hallway, and there was a bunch of patients on both sides of the hallway. But at the end, you could see a sign that says emergency room, and I thought they were going to the emergency department because, who would be there at 5 o'clock for acupuncture? But as we were walking, I could hear people whisper like, I think that's him. Yeah, it looks like him. I think it is him. And I'm like, are they talking about names out here? And one of the things that like struck me, that really struck a chord that sits with me to this day, is that when we're walking down the hallway, just before we got to his office, there was a guy like in a hospital gurney, a hospital bed, and he was just rearing up, making these god awful noises. I thought, well, they ought to get him down to the ER because that's where he's going. Why did they have him by the acupuncture clinic here? Lottie. So we go in the office, and the whole time he's introducing us to people in the office, because as you get into his office, you can actually go to different offices through offices. So you don't have to go out through the main hallway. So each office is connected inside. So his secretary came to give him his coffee, and for some reason it didn't taste really well. And he was complaining about how his coffee tasted horrible. But this whole time, we could hear this guy out in the hallway just making this awful noises. And he's not paying any attention to him. So in my mind, I'm thinking that he might be an ER patient, but as a physician, you should probably say something. And the two people I was with at MAS, the president and the vice president, they're looking at me. I'm looking at them, and I'm like kind of pointing. Do you hear that? Oh, yeah, we hear that. And the whole time he's just complaining about his coffee, and I'm like, oh my God. So it's kind of like I felt some anxiety because this guy is out there screaming. Because my background is in emergency medicine. Prior to even joining the military, I used to work at George Washington University Hospital. And finally, after about 5 minutes, he's asking us if he wants to taste the coffee. And I told him, I said, look, you're not going to believe this, but I never drank coffee before in my life, so I don't know what it tastes like. So that's interesting. And he goes, do you hear this man outside the hallway? And we're like, yeah, we hear him. He's like, well, I don't know his name. He's like, well, that's Bob out there. I'm like, okay. He's like, Bob has an issue where he was in Afghanistan. He fell off an airplane wing and he fell down to the tarmac about 11 feet. So he's like, he's a regular patient. These are my new patients on Wednesdays, but I tell my patients that pain doesn't have a schedule. So if you have pain, come see me. And I'm thinking, why is a guy in a hospital gurney here to see you in acupuncture? I was like, that's what's going on here. So he opens up the door. He goes, wheel Bob in. So he wheels Bob in, and he looks at the physician, the colonel, and he goes, hi, Richard. And I'm like, we're on a first name basis here. I'm like, oh, okay. And he looks at him and goes, Bob. He's like, Bob, do you drink coffee? He's like, yeah, I do. He's like, well, something's not right with my coffee. And I'm thinking, this man's having a conversation about this horrible coffee. This guy's screaming his head off. And he said to Bob, he goes, Bob, tell these young people why you're here, why I get supply. And Bob, in this grunting, groaning noise, kind of told us that he fell off an airplane wing in Afghanistan. Da, da, da. So Richard wheels him back out in the hallway, and we're looking at each other like, what's going on here? What's going on? So after about a minute, we decided to walk out there to see what's going on because he was treating him with the battlefield in the hallway because you see, part of the battlefield is you have to make these people walk. Now, I don't think this guy can walk because he's laying down and screaming. And why would they have him in this hospital gurney? And we go out there literally like a minute later, and he's like, he's doing this. He's stretching his arms. He's like, thanks, Richard. I really needed that. And he goes, sorry about the coffee, but I need to go. And this guy now runs down the hallway. Literally, he's like, I'm going to be late for work. I'm looking at this guy, Steve, and this woman, Ty Ali, and we're like, is this fake?
What did we just see?
Yeah. And so Richard goes, do you mind coming with me? Because I don't like the taste of my coffee. I'm going to go down to the cafeteria and get some coffee. And I'm like, I want some of that. I don't know what the hell just happened here. All morning long, that's all we saw was these crazy stories. And then when I came back to do the work with him, I was able to do this because I was retired military. I had a military ID because I'm disabled vet myself. He said, John, can you go in the closet over there and get me some like towels? I said, sure. I opened up this door and I swear to you, a bunch of like walkers and crutches and canes and all sorts of like walking devices came flying down on me, and they hurt. I was like, Richard, what's all this stuff in this closet? Well, you have all these walkers and crutches and wheelchairs and canes. He goes, hey man, I just help people out. They just leave the stuff here. I don't know what to do with it. Maybe I can melt it down or something. But he's just saying this nonchalantly, and I'm just shaking my head. I'm like, where the hell did I enter? Did I just enter some like parallel reality to something? So that was my introduction to Battlefield, and stuck with me because, like I said, my background is in Western medicine and in the emergency room department. And to me, this wasn't acupuncture. I don't know what the hell this was, but it was not acupuncture.
Now, you were working for the Maryland Association with their newsletter. Were you an acupuncturist at this point?
Correct.
Okay. So you'd gone through some acupuncture training and you'd had whatever training you had. We know it's helpful for pain, but you'd never seen anything like this.
No, I did the 4-year acupuncture program, and all my teachers were either from Shanghai or Beijing. And, we heard, I'm sure you heard these magnificent stories about, these Chinese things, how they put a needle in and the person's cured of this and that. And da, da, da. We've heard them. I've heard them for 4 years. I loved them. I'm a history guy. And I was just so fascinated by them. But to actually see it in real life and to do it with such effortless and just matter of factly, nah. It was just crazy. So I went back and I wrote about this, and I was telling Steve, I go, what should I write? He goes, well, don't write that. He was just saying we had this collaboration and go from there. And at the time, the Maryland medical physicians, the medical doctors who practice acupuncture, they have their own group, I guess you can call it. Like each state has a society of acupuncturists. Well, they have their own. And they were like, hey, licensed acupuncturists, you're welcome to come, not only come, but join. And every physician that was a member, they all were board certified in, like Neem Zhao, his is on radiation oncology. Another one was internal medicine and emergency medicine. A few were like pediatrics and ENT, but none of them practiced Western medicine. They all did acupuncture. So if something didn't work, they weren't write a prescription. They would do an acupuncture. I was just amazed. That just floored me.
That's great.
Yeah. So you hear you talking to these guys. I'm like, well, if it doesn't work, what are you going to prescribe? He's like, another point. I was like, what about a pill? He was like, oh, why would I want to do that? Even 2019, before the worldwide shutdown, there was a guy named Steve Sharp. He was a pediatric neurologist over at Bethesda Walter Reed, which is about 12 miles from where I'm sitting. And I'd go to see him, and I'm like, Steve, you do an acupuncture? He's like, no, I do homeopathy here too. So he's doing homeopathy and all sorts of crazy acupuncture. And I've been walking down the hallway. He's like, put your foot on the door. I go, why? He goes, just do it. And he's doing this stuff. And then he's like doing some crazy stuff. And he's doing this stuff called FSM, called frequent specific microcurrent. And he's saying, do you say to the patient, did you drink enough water today? He's like, yeah. So then he takes these pillow sheets that are polyester and he wraps it around their shoulders, wraps around their legs, and he puts these electrodes that are like running electric through. He's like, we're going to get a cross thing going on here. I was like, what kind of crap is this? So my experience with acupuncture has been the traditional Chinese medicine, but also this other side of, I call it the VU, because it's just that. It's just crazy.
The VU. Well, and this is in the military.
Yeah. These are physicians. These are not like licensed acupuncturists. I'm like, I can say this crazy stuff, but you can't. He's like, all right, I'm going to muscle test him, but he's paralyzed. So I need you to be the medium. I was like, bro, you sound like my mother here. You got a Ouija board? He goes, well, not here at home, but not here. I was like, you're not. I was like, you're a neurologist. You shouldn't be doing this. He's like, are you going to help me or not? I'm like, oh my God. Yeah, it was like literally like that.
So you basically get this, would you call it a mentorship, an internship? What would you call this?
I guess it was via mentorship. He's like, to this day, I still work with him. We had a Zoom meeting yesterday because we're putting together a symposium next year. So I still work with him to this day. I help make slides for him. His wife is actually doing some teaching now. I'm helping her with her stuff. So I'm doing a lot of that with him. So I guess it's a collaboration mentorship. I usually refer to him as, to my patients, I say my physician advisor. That's what I refer to him as.
Yeah. Okay. Now, where does this stuff come from? Battlefield Acupuncture. What's the, how to get invented? Or discovered?
So he went to a program out in California called the HMI Institute, Helms Medical Institute. And he came up with these 3 points on the ear, no matter what you had. And the points were omega-2, Schimann, and point zero. And if you came to him to see him with a broken heart or broken foot, you were getting those 3 points. So he loved them. And then sometime around 2000, he went to France and he learned about these needles called ASP. The ASP stands for Aiguille Semi-Permanent in French. And when he comes back to the U.S., he goes to Irvine, California, and there's a man, I don't know if you're familiar with a man by the name of Terry Olson, and another man named Z.H. Chu. Z.H. Chu.
Terry Olson wrote a book on auricular acupuncture. I remember getting it years and years and years and years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So he went to go see Olson and Chu is the inventor of the PET scan machine. And they were doing some research on the brain. And when he got there to Irvine, Niemzel tried to ask him about these needles. And Olson said, Richard, I would love to talk to you about this, but we just got some information off the FRI machine. We want to go look at it and kind of see what this is telling us. So Niemzel, along with being a medical physician, he also has an MPH in public health, and he also has a PhD in electrical engineering. So he goes, well, I have an MPH. Can I see this data you have? I said, sure.
What's an MPH?
Masters of Public Health.
Oh, okay.
Masters of Public Health. They're the people who did research. And so they said we were doing this study on these 2 specific points. The first one was the singular gyrus point in the ear, and the other one was the thalamus. And they realized with the singular gyrus point that it not only controls the pain in the limbic system part of the brain, but it also deals with the emotions associated with pain stimuli. And the thalamus has to do with directing where that information goes to once it enters the brain, what hemisphere or what part of the brain does it go to. And so they've summarized that these 2 points have a really huge part in playing some sort of pain modulation in the body. And the theory was that maybe these 2 points, if stimulated, could actually, tone down the patient's pain or reduce their pain. So Niemzel said to me, he goes, well, what happens if you put needles in these points? What would happen? So Olson goes, well, we don't know.
Now, wait a minute. How were they stimulating it for the study that they were doing?
It was probably some sort of needle or electrical, one of the two. Now, that's a good question. I'm not quite sure, because it wasn't until later on that they came up with a titanium needle that they can use in fMRI research and stuff like that. So I wasn't sure if they had a titanium needle back in that, because this is right around 2000. So Niemzel asked him, well, does it make a difference if we put needles or we use electric or laser or light? Olson goes, don't know. It's brand new data. And so Niemzel said, I got these new needles that I love, that I just got from France, I want to ask you about. you told me about 2 points that sound really interesting about pain modulation, but I also have 3 points I really like. I wonder what happens if I put all these pieces together. What would happen? So he goes back into his clinic that day into San Diego Balboa Hospital. And he tells me about this first patient he treats. And he said that he's treated this patient several times. She had fibromyalgia. And on a good day, he could do multiple different types of modalities on her. And maybe the pain would go from an 8 to a 4 after about 45 minutes. He said after about 2 or 3 needles, her pain was zeroed out. And he goes, I might be onto something here. So from that, he was able to come up with this protocol that he called Battlefield. And the reason why he calls it Battlefield is that back when I was on the battlefield back in the 90s, of course, things are totally different now. We had 2 choices of drugs. They were called M&Ms. You had morphine or Motrin. If you had something airway obstruction, if you had slow respiratory breathings, if you had shrapnel on the face, you couldn't get morphine because it lowered your respirations. So you got Motrin. So, you basically were giving somebody, Motrin versus for being a gunshot in the face at the time. Again, like I said, things have changed on the battlefield since 2001. So Niemzel, after the terrorist attack, said, I think this protocol that I have would do really wonders with these troops on the battlefield. He goes, this is where I want it to go. And I said, why did you call it the Niemzel protocol? And he goes, John, not many people can say my name or pronounce my name or even spell it. And I wanted to be really clear that this is where I wanted to go. I wanted to go on the battlefield to help people because he's been serving in the military since 1980. He went from 80 to 2009. So he had 30, 40 years, whatever it was. So that was his whole intent. So that's why he called it Battlefield. And throughout the evolution of my training with him, we would see a lot of dependence. And we'd say, oh, okay, so at the end of the treatment, we're going to give you Battlefield Acupuncture. And especially some people like the dependence, the women be like, I'm not into that more monger and stuff. I don't want Battlefield. And I don't know why you call it this term Battlefield. So his right-hand man, a guy named Steve Burns, another internist physician, goes, okay, let's call it takeout. You come in, you get some needles, and you get out of here. We'll call it Chinese takeout. So instead of calling it Battlefield, they would sometimes refer to it as Chinese takeout. And every now and then, I might be somewhere like it was 2019. I was in the UK, and we were talking about Battlefield, and a guy goes, this sounds like this protocol. They used to call it Chinese takeout. I'm like, that's what it is. So every now and then, I'll hear that term, and I was like, I know where that comes from. But it was really interesting just to watch the evolution of him, like modify, add to it. And, because you don't need to see, that's the interesting thing with the battlefield. You're like, someone will come in for foot pain or back pain. And you're like, I'm not addressing the specific root of the problem. I'm doing all these points. And he's like, yeah, don't worry about it. I'm like, for me, as an acupuncture, I'm like, we got to address the root and the branch here. He's like, what do you mean root and branch? I was like, oh, I'm sorry, the pathology and the symptomology. He goes, talk normal, would you? I said, okay. So to me, I would say, Richard, how does this work? And he would just look at me and goes, really well. Thank you, and move on. He wasn't really, answer the question. And then he said to me one day, he goes, John, I'm an oncologist, and a lot of my patients who get better and they have a lapse in their disease or they go in remission, they're not saying, well, Dr. Niemzel, how did this medicine work? They're out of my office, happy, enjoying life. He goes, why do you acupuncturists really want to know?
Yeah, mostly people don't care how it works. They just want to know that it works.
Yeah. He's like, you have all these questions. He goes, it sounds like you don't believe in this stuff. I go, I don't believe in it. He goes, then what are you doing with it? I said, well, it's not a religion. I don't need to believe in it for it to work. But I have a lot of patients, so I put these needles in it transforms and changes, and they want to know these answers. And I'm just like, I'm looking, I'm like, how does it work? Very well, thank you. Next question. That's to some people that was they were happy with it, but others were just like, no, you got to tell me how this works, because if you tell me how it works, then it's really going to work on me. And it's like some sort of placebo effect. So he really never got into the crux of that. And he goes, John, call it energetic aspirin. I don't care what you call it. It works. And over the years, I was able to figure out some of the backgrounds and why it would work and stuff like that, to the point where it's even mathematics.
So you've been able to reverse engineer it.
Exactly.
You've been able to reverse engineer it. Well, for those who are listening to this, I suspect some folks know about it. I think everybody knows about the, NADA 5 needles. This sounds like a version of NADA 5 needles with afterburners.
Correct. And the difference between Battlefield and NADA is that with the NADA, you're supposed to use all 5 points bilaterally. With Battlefield, there's 5 points in each ear. And sometimes you can use 1, 5, 10. You stop when the pain's at the desired level. It's all about titration. And that's the big difference. So that was a big key to me. So one of the things most people don't know is that the vast majority of people who do Battlefield are not licensed to do it. They're in the military. So they're nurses or technicians or something like that. So they can't do it on the outside, but they can do it on government property. Or the other thing I've been working with in the last 8 years is Native American tribes down in the desert Southwest. I've been training the Hualapi Indians how to do Battlefield, and they love it. They find this really interesting and fascinating. So majority of people that do it are not licensed. Matter of fact, every year, either the Navy or the Air Force get funding to train 10,000 people on becoming technicians in Battlefield Acupuncture. So the vast majority who do this are not licensed acupuncturists.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHEOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. So there's this whole group of folks who are practitioners of this particular method, and they have a rarefied place where they can do it. They can do it on military property and government property and work with that particular population, which is not small nor is it insignificant. And a lot of those folks have issues.
Correct. We just got to keep them on the base.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, look, there's the legalities, but I think we're all healers here. And, the interest for, I think all of us, me speaking to you and folks listening is, well, awesome. How can I help people with this? Because that's what we're here for. Can you run us through these different points and what's going on?
So they go in a sequence pattern, and even the sequence is kind of like backwards. When the slides were originally made in 212, there was a translation error. So the 4th and 5th point are kind of backwards, and that does make a difference. But you'll see that people who do it that way, they'll either do all 5 points on one side ipsilateral. So if their pain is on the left side, they'll do all 5, or they learn how to do it on both sides. So the point sequence is singular gyrus, thalamus, omega-2, Shinmin, and point 0. They're put in that way, and you put one needle in. It doesn't matter what side you start with. I always start with the ear that's closest to me. And after I insert the needle.
Really? Even if, say, they got pain on the left? Even if they got pain on the left, you wouldn't just go for the right? It doesn't really matter.
No. Because there's something called laterality, which is cross-switching, which is a totally different thing. Yeah, so if you do both sides, you're going to be able to figure that out. And I used to try to figure out if it's left-sided pain, should I go to the left side? And then I would do that, and then 60, 50, 80% of the times, it was always different. It wouldn't matter. And especially if a person has dyslexia, it makes a difference too. So after you insert a needle and you have them walk for about 30 seconds, you'd say, okay, your pain was, let's say, an 8 out of 10. I put this needle in. I had you go for a short 30, 40-second walk. You're back here. What's your pain now level now? And then that's how you would adjust. It's more of an algorithm. You put information in and you get information back. You just discern where you go next. You see what I'm saying? So a lot of times the patient might say, my pain was an 8, now it's gone. That's it. Well, what do you want me to do? And then, as an acupuncturist, you have to play the dog and pony show. Like, well, I just put one needle in. I feel bad. I'm going to charge you this amount of money. Where a medical doctor would come behind you and say, see, that's why you come to me. It's one needle and that's it. Where an acupuncturist has to feel like they have to do more.
I want to put a pin in this, no pun intended. But this is a really interesting thing that I think often results in overtreatment. Because we might be able to do a lot of good work with just a couple of few needles, but then, oh my God, well, I only put in 3 needles. Patient's going to think they didn't get their money's worth. Look, if they got the effect they're looking for, they got their damn money's worth.
Yeah, simple is beautiful.
Adding more needles in, especially when I look back on earlier years of practice and thinking about cases that didn't get better, I don't think it's because I didn't use enough needles. I think it's because I used too many.
With Battlefield, if you use too many, the pain will start to creep back up.
Okay, that's interesting.
Well, yeah. So what you do then is you just start pulling out in reverse the ones you put in last, the second to last or last, and we'll go back down. The other thing I noticed, on my website, I did this research when I was with the Native Americans. I was like, well, how is your patient population acceptance? They're like, oh man, this is great down here. This is fantastic. They're like, oh, we have all our patients have like nomad blood. And they were explaining this to me. And I'm like, wait, stop, go back. What kind of blood? They're like, nomad blood. And I was like, what is that? They're like, oh, nomad blood is patients who have B blood types. I was like, very interesting. I was like, okay. They're like, yeah. And so they try to explain to me that certain people with different blood types respond different to pain. I was like, oh, I never heard that. Sure enough, I went into PubMed and there it is. People have different blood types that respond different to pain. There's peer-reviewed studies. Even when I was practicing Western medicine, I was doing anesthesia, especially with suturing. If I was going to do an injection of like Lidocaine, I knew somebody was redhead, they needed more anesthesia. I knew that. But what I was able to figure out by a course of 5 years, that I found that patients who had blood types of O positive, or O positive or O negative, they don't like nothing in their ears. So if you have a nodded patient who are like, it works, but I don't like it, ask them what their blood type is. I bet you it's going to be O. If they get this reaction where they feel euphoric or high, they're probably A or AB. So depending on their blood type, I can tell you what kind of outcome they're going to have.
Is that true with body acupuncture as well, or just ear acupuncture in the ear?
Just ear acupuncture, and even ear seeds as well too. They just don't like stuff in their ears. They just like, and like I'll say this in class and I'll hear this slam on the table. I love nada. I just can't have nothing in my ears. Are you an O blood type? Yeah, I am. Then you'll see them down like this on the phone, look up at me and like, they give me this dirty look and they're like, I got a question. Like, yeah, I just tested all my patients who I do not on who hate it. And they're all O blood types. It's amazing. You know what? That took me 15 years to figure that one out. What I'm going to tell you to do with this information is that this, less needles are better. That's it. And let them know that it's not their fault. Say, you have a blood type that, in my clinical experience, you don't like anything in your ears. So if you explain this to them, they're more open and they're more receptive to keeping them in a little bit longer. So that's how it helps me help my patients. So that was really interesting, learning all that and just dealing with these different types of groups of people. And you'd be surprised how many different people do Battlefield. And sometimes I'll go to I'll give you an example. I went to Fort Riley, Kansas to teach the Army's infantry unit. And they had this, they said, well, this is, I forget the guy's name. Let's call him Bob. This is Bob over here. Bob's an admin guy. He's like, I'm a secretary. I'm a typist. Well, I want you to train Bob over here because once all the practitioners go home, Kansas is a big state. So if somebody comes in and they can't be seen, Bob over here is going to treat them. And Bob has no medical experience. He spells acupuncture with 2 C's. And it turns out Bob was the best one out of the entire class. I mean, so I got to the point where if you don't know anything about acupuncture and I have a question, I'm asking you. Because they use a common sense. They use some sort of sense that's not there. When I was a kid, I had a great opportunity to work for a guy named Jordan Steinberg. He owned the New York Yankees. And he would ask me these questions. He'd be like, Johnny, I got a question. And he would ask me about baseball. I'm like, George, I have no clue. Well, you ask one of your guys. He's like, I want some sort of common sense, some straight answer. And I always took that with me. So when somebody doesn't understand something, I'll ask them. And it may not be a technical answer I'm getting, but it might lead me in another direction that gives me the answer or the clue I need to figure out the problem. So sometimes we are our own worst enemies. We trip over our own.
This is why clinical practice is so interesting and at times frustrating, because we've got all these great ideas.
Correct.
And we're sometimes tripping over our own feet. The world, via our patients, is actually sending us a message, but we're not seeing it. We're missing it. Now, hang on just a second. Did you say that you work for George Steinberg?
Steinbrenner.
Yeah,
1991 for 6 weeks. I was doing spring training in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Yeah.
How did that happen?
So I had a job working at this place called Top of the Park. It was a racetrack. It was Top of the Park is a racetrack in Pompano Park, Florida. And the company was owned by a service called Volume Services. And they're the ones who would like dole out the beer or the peanuts at the stadiums, like the big, I guess you could say football and baseball stadiums. So during the daytime when there was spring training, because the park opened at nighttime, because it was nighttime track racing for horses, if you wanted to get some extra hours, make some extra money, you can go over to Yankee Stadium in Fort Lauderdale where they had spring training and work there. Unfortunately, I started low on the totem pole. This job was to like sling beer because you got big tips or peanuts or, one of those jobs.
Yeah. Now, wait a minute. 1971. How old are you?
No, 91.
No, 91. Okay, good.
So 91, that's what I was doing. And my job was, after the game was over, to go to the players in the dugout, or I guess the locker room, and say, okay, tomorrow's a road game. We're having sandwiches. What kind of sandwich you like? What kind of bread? And I get their order. And I had a boss who said, John, I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's a coach, a bat boy, a mascot, a girlfriend, anybody. Only players get sandwiches. That's it. So I was taking an order. I seen George Steinbrenner, and he's like, I'll only tell you what I want on mine. And I said, sorry, sir, only for the players. He goes, you know who I am? I said, of course I know who you are. Matter of fact, as I'm talking to you now in my basement, I actually have a letter from him that was addressed to my mother back in the 80s. My mother used to work for the airlines. I was like, of course I know who you are. And he's like, he got mad. And then next day when I went to work, my boss, his name was Scott, he goes, Howard, we got to talk. I go, what? He goes, Steinbrenner wasn't too happy. He goes, I got some bad news. I was like, he fired me? He goes, no, worse. He wants you to be his personal runner for him. I thought, oh my goodness gracious. So the first job I got with Steinbrenner, he said, here's a walkie-talkie. When I call, you come running. And I was literally on the other side. He goes, run across the field because they were in between innings. I was like, you want me? He's like, you got a pass? I go to him and I go, what do you need? He goes, I want you to go to the front of the stadium and bring up the old man to see me. I go, who's the old man? He goes, you'll know, go get him. So I go down there and there's security and the guys looking at me, they see my badge. I was like, hey, I'm here to take the old man, whoever that is, to Steinbrenner. The guy's laughing. He goes, he'll be here soon. I'm like, who's this old man? And sure enough, who gets out of the car? Joe DiMaggio. So I'm walking him to Steinbrenner's box. So I said, Mr. DiMaggio, can you please follow me? I need to take you to the box where Mr. Steinbrenner is. And he goes, are you Mr. Steinbrenner's son? He started laughing. I go, God, no. I said, I've been punished before, but not that bad. But honestly, I actually became kind of close with him. He was a really nice guy. And one day he made me late and I didn't have a ride home and he drove me home. And I was like, oh, George, this is cool. You got a Rolls Royce. He's like, is that a Rolls Royce? I go, well, what is it? He goes, it's a Bentley. Okay. So we pull in the driveway. My stepfather's washing his car. He's looking at Steinbrenner. My stepfather grew up in Brooklyn, so he knows who this guy is. And he's just spraying water. And Steinbrenner's like, what's wrong with that guy spraying water all over the place? I go, he sees you and he's in shock. He's like, oh. I was like, now you tell me you never look at people and they notice you when you're driving, you'll crash into. He goes, yeah. I was like, there it is. He just has a hose in his hand. He doesn't have a steering wheel. He goes, okay. And then Steinbrenner didn't notice, but I worked at the track and guess where he went? I can say I had the honor of introducing Steinbrenner to a guy named Kenny Rogers, the singer, at one time or the other.
You seem to have this like weird karmatic thing that puts you in some very interesting situations. I mean, you got a job with Steinbrenner because you said, no, I'm sorry, Mr. Steinbrenner, you're not a player. No sandwich for you. That got you a damn job. That's hilarious. you are doing this newsletter for your acupuncture association, and you find your fate.
Oh, it gets even better. So when I was with Neemsal, I wrote a few books on Battlefield Acupuncture, and there are certain things you do that you won't tell, but in acupuncture, you tell people, hey, look what I did. I was able to do this, that, and the other thing. But one of the things we were involved with is one of the things we just couldn't talk about at the time. We can now, and I'll explain to you how this came about. So when I first met this guy named Terry Olson, it was at a Friday night event before he taught on Saturday and Sunday at the Maryland Acupuncture Society conference. And we were at a restaurant, and it was in outside of Baltimore, and Olson's hotel was in Baltimore, and it was about a 25-minute ride. So Richard Neemsal, who was his sponsor here, was going to drive him back, and he calls me over, and he goes, take Terry back to the hotel. And he goes, if Terry asks why, tell him what I'm doing, but make sure he shuts his phone off in the car. So afterwards, I said to Terry, Mr. Olson or Dr. Olson, I was instructed to drive you back to the hotel for Dr. Neemsal. He goes, why isn't Richard doing it? I go, well, when you get in the car, I'll tell you why. And he goes, oh, this is going to be interesting. So Olson said to me, I go, is your phone off? He goes, yeah. And he goes, why? And I said, I don't know. That's what Richard told me. He turned his phone off. So we're driving. I said, expect contact tomorrow, and he'll explain his actions. I said, but the reason why I'm driving you home is that today when we were at the meeting, you saw him looking at his phone. He goes, yes. I go, he got a call from the president of the United States. He had to go treat the president of the United States. And he looks at me and he goes, oh God, please don't tell me he's going to go treat him with those bastardized points he calls Battlefield Acupuncture. I go, I do believe that's what it's going to be, but you can talk with him tomorrow about it. So when people ask, well, how did Battlefield get in the military, and how did it, NATO forces are now using it, people at, NASA want to bring it to space, all sorts of weird stuff. How did that get involved? It was because of the connection Neemsal had with the president and the vice president at the time. And this went on for like 5 or 6 years. And we knew about it. We just couldn't talk about it. My patient's like, you were late. You were supposed to be an hour ago. I was like, I'm sorry. It was traffic. Like, where were you at? I was like, stuck in traffic. I actually lost a patient because of that. I couldn't tell them the truth. If I told them the truth, they thought I was nuts.
So these bastardized points, air quotes here, bastardized points. It sounds like when you're working with people, you're going to put one in, you're going to walk them around, you're going to see what their pain does. And when it gets to a place where it's like, okay, that's enough, you're done. It could be 1 point, it could be 2 points, it could be 3 points, right? It could be 10 points. You might end up doing both years. Okay. So as an acupuncturist, of course, I want to know, what are you seeing these points doing? Like, what's the personality of these points?
So that's a good question, because over time I thought, if you look at a strong narcotic, what does it do? Does it address the root of the problem or the branch? And ultimately what we're trying to get at is we're trying to get the body out of pain. And if we can get it out of pain, we can say that the immune system can take over. So at that level, we can say that, just look at a mother who has a bunch of kids and they're always going crazy. If you take her out of an environment for a couple hours, it gets better. Here, remember that commercial back in the 80s, Calgon, take me away. You had that moment of just relaxation. Well, when you can get your body out of pain, the immune system can take over. So I think what we're doing is we're basically dialing down the pain tolerance threshold. And in the immune system, if it's healthy enough, can actually now kick back in and help itself. So what we're doing is just modulating the pain levels. So some people say, well, is that really working on the root of the problem? Da, da, da. And when you understand auricular therapy or battlefield acupuncture, you understand that you're working with the vagus nerve. And so the needle that we use is a gold ASP needle. Gold. People are like, well, why do you use gold? If it's reduced, you add this. If it's tonified, you add that. I said, it's an illusion, man. It's like, if you look at that gold needle, underneath that gold is stainless steel. So I call it a yin yang. I know that's not the correct term for it, but it's like a vitamin. Your body's going to take whatever it wants from that treatment and from there. So if we can just modulate someone's pain level down, it works. And then when you look at how the vagus nerve interacts with the body, I used to call it the Zong Fu meridian, because it had a connection to every organ except the bladder. So if you look at it from that perspective, it works in that direction. It's not about tonifying or reducing with Battlefield. It's about bringing the body to homeostasis, into harmony.
Right. So it sounds to me Like, look, you've got somebody with pain. That's a little bit like a house on fire. Now, maybe that house needs to have some remodeling done, but first thing you want to do is put the damn fire out.
Correct. And what I usually tell people when they start doing Battlefield, I'll say, okay, today's your first day learning Battlefield. Because the class is divided up. In the morning, it's didactic, and in the afternoon, it's clinical hands-on training. So by the time you leave there, you get to know how to do it. So Monday morning, you can actually use it in your clinic. And I'll say, here's how you incorporate it. Do what you normally do in your clinic. Okay, if you do acupuncture, herbs, whatever. When the patient's ready to leave, if their pain level is above a 3, then consider Battlefield as an adjunct to go home with. That's a good way of it's a great way of synergistically connecting the treatments, because, no matter what style of acupuncture you have, that's rooted into you. I'm not here to say, get rid of that and plant this, but it works really well. And you see that nice synergy it has. But what I found is that when you have some patients and you get them down to a pain level of 0 with Battlefield, they seem to get themselves back in trouble. So for instance, if I have an athlete like a runner, if their pain level is an 8, I'm stopping at a 4. And the reason why is if you get it down to a 0, oh God, you're going to have when you have a runner and you take his money, basically took away his Prozac. You did that. Now I can tell you this because I used to be a runner, and I planned my honeymoon, my wedding, all around running races. And when I wasn't running, things were crazy. And then when I would go back and test it after I got acupuncture. If the acupuncture's got me really low, I would mess up and do that. So with Battlefield, you have to be really careful on who you're treating, especially out here in Maryland. I live in an area that's not too far from Western Maryland, where people have a lot of farms. People have farms are really independent. So if you get them out of pain, they have a whole laundry list of things they got to get to. So you got to be careful you don't take away all their pain. You got to make sure you titrate that amount where it helps them, but it doesn't help them get themselves back in trouble.
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner, because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital chi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
I've certainly seen this with certain athletes. Absolutely. It's like, okay, I feel great. So now I go down to the gym and I did this 4-hour monster workout. Now my back hurts again. It's like,
Exactly. Why do you come on Thursday afternoons to get acupuncture? Well, because on Thursday nights I have Zumba and I want to push through it. I'm like, oh, great. We're basically becoming an enablers. So I learned how to give them some tough love.
I usually just tell them, look, you feel really good right now, but you feel better than you actually are. So push it at 70%, because I know they're going to actually push it to 90 if I say 70.
Yeah. And I tell them, I say, look, we'll get you there. I was like, the problem, the pathology is still there. The pain is not there because your body's taking a break. I said, but you best believe it's going to come back. This is medicine. This ain't voodoo, and I would tell people that.
So how long can people expect for Battlefield Acupuncture to be useful pain relief?
Sometimes it can go away completely. I had one patient who was I have some crazy patients. This guy, when he bought a house, he bought an old ambulance. That's how injured he gets, because he works on farm equipment. So with him, and the pain went away, one treatment for 4 years. But some people have like complex regional pain syndrome, RSD, whatever they call it these days. If it works, sometimes a few hours, but conservatively, anywhere from 3 to 5 days is a conservative estimate where their pain will be much, much lower, or they'll be really, oh yeah, that felt really good. And over a course of a period of time, let's say their worst pain was an 8 out of 10 on the worst day, and their you days were like a 4. After a number of treatments of Battlefield, the worst days will be a 4, and the best days will be no pain. So it's kind of like a step down effect. So it works like that, So, like I said, you have to be really careful. I was telling Richard Neens out the inventor of the protocol, it's like, this protocol, you be careful because you have the ability to do something to get people back in trouble. I had a gentleman who came to a treatment who was late, and we have a really strict policy, and he was 35 minutes late, and he was all excited about why he was late. And he pulls me to the window. He goes, "This is why I was late." I was like, "Why were you late?" He goes, "I can better show you." So we go to the window, and he cracks the window open, and he goes, "You see that?" And I literally saw like a pickup truck and a horse trailer. And I can actually see the trailer shaking, and I can hear it now. Whatever's in it is kicking the trailer. It's like, doom, doom. He's like, "That's why I'm late." I was like, "Well, what's in there?" He's like, "A horse." And I go, "Oh, you gotta go pick up a horse before your treatment?" He goes, "No." He goes, "I won it." Like in a sweepstakes? He goes, "No, I won it in a bar fight." I was like, "You won it what?" He's like, "I won it in a bar fight." So I'm like, I think one of the herbs he was on too was like Shadiala is like free and easy wanderer. He's like, "I think that's working." I'm like, "I don't think so." I was like, if you're still getting bar fights and winning horses, I was like, oh my God. So I have patients that are crazy. So sometimes you don't want to take them out of pain completely because who knows who you might show up with the next day with a trailer. And I didn't know I was joking. I was like, oh, that's really crazy. I'm like, how do I even address this? I was like, oh.
It's really fun being an acupuncturist, isn't it? I mean, the stories that we hear sometimes. Well, I mean, they're just telling us about their lives. I mean, it's a safe place for that.
Hey, it's like, at least you didn't win your girlfriend in the bar fight. He goes, "Well, that wouldn't matter because me and my wife have the same taste in women." I was like, it was good. So anyway, I was like, "What were you doing?" It's like, "I don't know. What are we going to do today?" I was like, "Let's go to the bar." I'm thinking to myself, I need a drink after this one. So yeah, so Battlefield, you get to see these interesting.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Now, I want to come back to the points for just a moment. Again,
sure.
As an acupuncturist, I want to try to understand, is there specific actions for each of these points that you're thinking about? Or is it really just a matter of, here's the points, here's the order that we use them, and here's how we needle? Is it just that simple? Or is there something else going on? You're talking about with the singular gyrus. That's a portion of the brain, and the thymus is a gland. So what's going on here?
Some people, when they do herbs, they just know formulas. This formula does that. That formula does this. If you want to modify it, they're like, "Oh, he's got to get a new formula." I don't know, modify it. There's formulas, and then there's modifications. So everything makes up that formula. Same thing with the acupuncture points for Battlefield. So like I said, the first point, the singular gyrus point, works with not only the pain, but the emotions associated with pain. The other thing at a deeper level is when you start looking at auricular acupuncture, you get into what's called the Noget phase system. The word phase means the state of disease. Is it acute, chronic, or degenerate? Okay. So when you look at that singular gyrus point now represents in a chronic phase, like where liver 3 would be on the foot. Okay. When you look at the thalamus point in the ear, here's the other thing about these points. They're not, like if you looked at a clinical manual to find these points, you would find that Nienzel's points were not exactly where you'd find them in the manual. And I'd say, well, why did you call this point 0 or Shidman? And he's like, well, it was close to that point. I just moved it. I was like, well, you don't move a point. When you move the needle, it becomes different. He goes, I moved the point down. So they become different things. So that they're basically clinically based points, I guess you could say. So the thalamus works really well with helping with pain, but also helping with conditions like knee issues, posterior back problems. The third point is omega-2. That works better in women than in men. And on top of that point, omega-2 will help increase your tolerance to red wine. So you got to be very careful with that point. It will also help take away headaches, but also that's really good for addressing like problems with the extremities, like from the wrist to the tips of the fingers, and from the ankles to the tips of the toes, and from the shoulders to the top of the head. So that works really well. Then we get to the Shimon point, and that's the interesting thing.
Wait a minute. Hold on. Resistance to red wine? What does that mean?
No, so the omega-2 point will help or hurt you. It increases your tolerance to red wine. So let's say, for instance, you have somebody who can drink 1 or 2 glasses and they feel okay. Well, you give them the Battlefield, you put omega-2 in, and then all of a sudden it's like, I was able to drink 4 glasses and feel the same way as I did when I was at 2 glasses. Why is that? You'll see that quite a lot. Okay.
Is this just red wine or is this other alcohol?
It's usually red or white wine. It's not, I haven't seen it with beer or liquor. I haven't seen it with beer, I should say. I've seen it with liquor a little bit, but mostly with wine, red and white, and sangria too.
That's super curious.
Yeah. And the last 3 points are interesting. I'll explain what they do individually. But let's say somebody comes to see you today in your clinic and they say, well, Michael, I'm going to have a headache. It's Wednesday. I know Friday you're going to be out of town or where you might even not be clinical hours. But I know when I get my period, I'm going to get a headache. I know it's going to happen. I don't have something now. Can you give me something for it then? Sure, I can try herb or whatever. With Battlefield, you can prophylactically treat them with the last 3 points, the omega-2, Shin-Med, and point zero. Treat them bilaterally and send them home. You'd be surprised that their headache usually doesn't come. So those points individually work in different ways, but they can also work together. The last 3 points, the first 2 + 3, there's all these different layers to it. And one of the interesting points about Shin-Med is, if you look at Shin-Med, like if you read Olson's book, it says 1/3 of the way up on the triangle fossa. But Niemsal puts this point kind of where the apex of the inferior and superior crucia is, the triangle fossa. And I go, why is that? And he goes, well, what do you do with the Shin-Med point? You're basically calming the mind, right? Go, yeah. Well, if you look at where he puts his point on the ear, you just go directly below it. And inside the concha, there's a kidney point. And he goes, if you take your hands and put them on your hips, where your thumb's touching, you're touching the adrenal glands. So basically, the Shin-Med point that he uses is all about addressing the parasympathetic, sympathetic, ACTH cycle right there. So it regulates a lot of that. You'll see a lot of regulation with that point. And the last point, point zero, he doesn't put it exactly where we learned it in school because these needles are really thick, real thick. So he moves it more posterior back on the concha ridge wall where there's enough cartilage enough here. So it kind of lines up where it makes a nice 30-degree angle with the last 3 points. And when you get into auricular medicine, which is totally different than auricular acupuncture, which is a different ball of wax, you'll start seeing these sacred geometry lines. If something works on this line here or this point, you can go 30 degrees in either direction and you'll see all those points will be activated. So there's a lot of overlay to that. So when you hear about Battlefield Acupuncture, I like, don't worry about the points. Just put the point here, put the point there. People are like, but why? You're not teaching me. I was like, just go with it, okay? If you ever watch that movie Karate Kid, where Mr. Miyagi is making Daniel do all this work, and he's like, you're making me wash the car. I can't do nothing. So he goes, okay, fine. He starts throwing punches at him. He's throwing wax on, wax off. He's like, he's blocking. He's like, what the hell's going on here? I can fight. That's the same thing with Battlefield. Even though you may not know what you're doing, you're getting it. But the theory will come later. You have to understand how it all works. Because if I try to throw it all onto you together, I had 5 years of learning this. I can't teach it in 2 days, and it would overwhelm people. So I always found that to be a good analogy. Kind of, let's take it step by step. Trust me, you're doing more than you really think. Your first day at herb school, they're not teaching you these complex formulas.
This is really interesting, John. So often when we are learning something, we first learn the theory of it. There's a whole didactic piece. We're supposed to get a map in our mind, so to speak, of how all the pieces work. And it sounds like what you're doing is more, these things work. Let me show you how they work. Learn to make it work. We can talk about some theory later.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's too heavy. Because when they see this work, when these people see this work for the first time, it's sometimes emotional. I'm sure you've seen your clinical practice with acupuncture herbs, you help somebody and you're just an emotional wreck. Like sometimes you do this class on Battlefield, you have to bring tissues with you because people are crying. I had to tell people a lot of times, like, man, my name is John. It's not Jesus. I probably said it 100 times by now. But, when you get into the crux of it, just get them to do this. I'll explain the theory on it. because it's pretty deep. Because when you see how this works, I'm trying to explain to you, but you're seeing that patient that just left in the results. And I'm talking to you and you're not understanding me. So you got to be in the right frame of mind for us to have this conversation, because you just have the wow factor.
Yeah. Okay. So a couple of things here. I want to come back to the vagus nerve in a moment, but you just said auricular medicine as being something different than auricular acupuncture. And then you said another two words that when I put them together with Battlefield Acupuncture, now you got me scratching my head. Okay, sacred geometry on one hand, Battlefield Acupuncture on the other, AKA Chinese takeout. Tell me a little bit more about the sacred geometry in the ear.
So I'll unpack that for you. So the best way to describe those terms I just used, and I'll put them in easy format. So a patient comes to your clinic today and said, Michael, I have some shoulder pain. So you might be doing stomach 40, you might prescribe a phlegm herb, whatever. And you're thinking, you know what? Let me put one needle in his ear where the shoulder point would be. The focus of that is on the body. The ear is the adjunct. Okay. So that's what we call ear acupuncture. Okay. That would be just an adjunct. That was just treating the branch. But your main focus of treating a shoulder pain is in the body. Auricular therapy is where you have Battlefield and you have like Nada, where you're using just the ear, not the body, just the ear to treat the person's pathology, the root of the problem. When you have auricular medicine, that's a little different. That's when you're using the ear as a form of diagnosis and a form of treatment. So they use something called the VAS pulse. It stands for vascular autonomic signal. Well, they'll put their thumb on the radial pulse, and they might take something like a frequency light and it'll come close to your ear. And if it responds, then they know that's what's called the positive VAS. This is all auricular medicine. You can put any medication you're currently on next to your body and see how it reacts. Interesting stuff. But auricular medicine is about using filters. It's about using the ear. It's using the ear as not only as a form of treatment, but also a diagnosis. You see? So you have one with auricular acupuncture or ear acupuncture. You just put one needle in and it's as an adjunct because you're treating the body. You have auricular therapy where you're using just the ear to treat the whole body. Auricular medicine is where you're using all these different other stimuli on the ear as a form of treatment, as a form of diagnosis. So that's auricular medicine. The sacred geometry has with auricular medicine, yeah. And that's when you start seeing these specific points in the ear start to go and like, oh, well, this point is active here. And you start to see these lines of 30-degree angles, axes, that if one point is activated, you'll find that they're all activated on that 30-degree angle line. So that's a really unique phenomenon. And even some of that's interesting with, like, I'll step back with Battlefield. Sometimes Battlefield may stop working or not work as well. They get it to be back online or get it to work again. You stimulate 0.0 for either 2 minutes with electrical frequency or 30 minutes with needles. You take them out. It's like, like before we start talking, I was trying to get my headset all worked and everything was wigged out. Well, I changed computers and I restarted it. And what happened? Now we're here. When you hit 0.0, it hits like a restart. It's like the restart button. And it's like the center of the body. You're basically grounding it again. So you have all these interesting, and everything works. All these geometry points basically work at a 0.0. So it's all about bringing the body back into alignment. And there's all these different things. And you have the French version of the auricular medicine. You have the German version of auricular medicine. And there's even a school, believe it or not, in Colorado that gives a doctorate degree in auricular medicine. It's really just your acupuncture, though. It's a school for Native American, like they do shamanism there. So they even use the term wrong. So the terminology is mixed. People don't use the terminology correctly. It's like saying you're an herbalist, but well, that would be auricular. So if you do auricular medicine, you're doing auricular medicine. And there's only a handful of people that I know that do that really well. It's like saying an herbalist or I just prescribe some formula. See, it's a big difference. Big difference. Oh, big difference. And that's the deal. So we use those terms. So if somebody says, "Oh, go see John over here. He does. He's an herbalist." Technically, no. I just do patent herbs. You know what I'm saying? But you go see Michael, and you're going to give him this individual. You see the difference. But even though they call us the same terms, we're really at two different levels.
Sure. Well, look, there's what something is named and then there is what that something actually is. One of the things I love about being an acupuncturist, and I use that term acupuncturist, is because nobody really knows what an acupuncturist does other than they use needles. So, but like anything else that happens, they don't know, right? So it gives me a lot of latitude to do all kinds of things in my clinic. Yeah, really helpful.
And with the Battlefield with me, since I learned it when I just started off, it allowed me to continue learning my acupuncture studies. I was just right out of school, but it allowed me to help patients for them to come back. It was allowing me to kind of put this into my clinical practice so I can fuse them together so I can have like a collective type of treatment that's synergized really well together. I really like that. It wasn't like one stepped on the other. It wasn't like, well, I give you this, I can't do that.
Yeah, you can put them together. And I really like your way of talking about it. Do what you're already doing, especially if you're working with pain. And if they still have some, then use a few of these Battlefield points, see what happens. It's a great way to start mixing it in without changing up too much of what you're doing. Because look, anytime we go take a class or we've got a new method or we want to try something with a patient, if they've been with us for a while, they're like, well, what are you doing? This is different. It's a little confusing, sometimes concerning for them, right? So with this, you just mix it in. They won't even notice.
Exactly. And that's true. Or sometimes you can be honest, say, look, I just went through this class and I learned this protocol. And some people are like, well, are you afraid of saying to your patient you just learned something new? I was like, no, that's what I want them to know, that I'm always learning. I'm not stagnant versus I don't know everything.
Well, all you got to do is be in clinic for any length of time. You see how much you don't know. That's for sure.
Oh, without a doubt. Whenever you think you know it, you're like, oh, I don't know nothing now.
I know. It takes some fortitude to do this work. That's for sure. You mentioned, I want to come back to this before we wind it down for today, but you mentioned how Battlefield also has quite an effect on the vagus nerve. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that because vagus nerve is a big thing these days.
Yeah. So the first point that we talked about was the singular gyrus point. If you look at where the vagus nerve interacts into the ear, it's right over that pathway where the singular gyrus is. So by using the needle and sometimes even electrical frequency, you're basically addressing what's going on with the vagus nerve. You're getting all this information from the vagus nerve, and by needling it, you're sending a message back through it. So you can adjust the whatever's going on in the body from the vagus nerve. When you hear people talk about, oh, I had this piercing, it was really good for like headaches, and it's over here, it's up here on top of the ear. Why is that? Because that's where the vagus nerve and the phase 3 point is. Remember, wax on, wax off? Phase 3 has to do with chronic conditions. Phase 1 is acute, phase 2 is degenerate. So when something is chronic, like headaches, there it goes. Why is it up there? That's where the vagus nerve is, up there by the ear point. Here, I'll give you another example of chronic versus acute. You ever do like an appetite control point? The appetite control point is on the tragus of the ear. It's like, why? That's not on the stomach. The stomach's in the concha. Why is it on the tragus? Well, most people try to lose weight. It's chronic. And if you look at the tragus, that's where phase 3 is, and that's the stomach point. It's right over the acupuncture control point. So if you look at someone's tragus, it kind of like has that curve to it. And in auricular therapy and auricular acupuncture, you'll see that there's different phases, and that's why that point is there. So addressing it in different areas and different ways, you're getting it at a different angle. And the vagus nerve doesn't go through that to the tragus, but it comes to the top of the tragus where you would treat it for headaches. So when people get these piercings or these cauterizations up there, the headache goes away. Why? Because you basically just put a logjam there. So a point could be multiple places on the ear. Depends on the state of the disease, is it acute, chronic, or degenerative?
Yeah. Well, and it depends on if it's chronic, acute, or degenerative.
Correct.
And so that just makes the ear like more than 3 times complex.
Correct. When you're prescribing a formula, you start here and they're getting better and you always have to adjust it. Same thing with the ear. It goes from acute to chronic to maybe, a person might be degenerate and then you get them out of that stage. And most people forget the backside of the ear is for people who have muscular motor problems, or people who have like dystonia or tight muscles, torticollis. You treat the backside of the ear. So there's a lot to it, and that's what I liked about Battlefield.
Yeah. I mean, here we are, we're a little over an hour into this, and I realize I've got way more questions about the ear now than I had when we started. So I'm going to consider that an hour well spent. It's really been mind-opening, and I appreciate that.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me and explaining this.
Anything else that you would like to share with our listeners before we wind this down for today?
If anybody has any questions about Battlefield or anything he's talking about, one of the things we did talk about was history and how long it's been going on in the U.S. for a long time. I have a website. It's called battlefieldacupuncture.net, and there's a section called Student Seminar Downloads. And if you go to that tab and you click on it, if you go that entire page, there's protocols, there's history where I talk about how it works with the ear. I even talk about how I combine Battlefield and NADA together, stuff like that. So there's a lot of information you can get if you're interested in that you can just download. It's free PDFs.
Fantastic. I will make sure that's on the show notes page, along with anything else you may have, classes, schedules, that kind of thing. We'll have it over there for people who'd like to check it out.
Michael, thank you for your time and opportunity to present this to you.
John, this has been great. Thanks for your time. It's been a lot of fun. I still can't believe it. You work for George Steinbrenner. That's incredible. That's fantastic, man. You've been lucky. Keep up the good work. There is a part of me that's a little lazy. I want to be able to quickly, effectively, and without too much in the way of mental processing, be able to help somebody with acupuncture. There are protocols like the NADA 5 needles that can be very helpful for pretty much anyone across a wide range of troubles on the psychoemotive level. I thought Battlefield Acupuncture might be another quick and easy fix. But after talking to John, I see that while on the surface it seems simple and effective too, there's a lot more going on as you begin to look at the ear. And he also made the point, which I think is something that we don't talk about often enough, which is that treatment, it needs to be titrated. More is not necessarily better, and the correct amount of treatment is something to consider. Again and again, I am brought back to the lessons of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, that we're looking to avoid too little, and for that matter, and maybe even more importantly, too much. And it's essential that we be focused on what's just right. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.